What happens when a rock band achieves absolute perfection? You might assume that crafting a flawless record guarantees lifelong fame and unbreakable brotherhood. It makes sense, but the untold truth of the classic rock era reveals a much darker reality. For many of the biggest bands of the 1970s, hitting #1 on the Billboard charts was the exact catalyst that destroyed them. The immense pressure of elaborate conceptual narratives didn't just drain their bank accounts. It shattered their sanity, it triggered vicious legal battles, and it tore apart lifelong friendships. Today, we are looking at 10 monumental records that changed music history forever. But they demanded the heaviest sacrifice imaginable, the bands themselves. Number 10, Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. The year is 1973. Yes is riding high on an unbroken streak of success. But here's the strange part. When keyboardist Rick Wakeman found himself on stage playing their newest material, he hated it so deeply that he ordered a curry mid-concert. He casually ate it right over his keyboards, in front of thousands of fans. That level of open disdain didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was forged in the studio. Lead singer John Anderson's soaring ambition had led to a massive double album, containing only 4 sprawling 20-minute tracks. The recording sessions were meticulous, almost to the point of madness. In a quest to capture a specific earthy atmosphere, the band constructed literal farmyard pens right there in the recording studio. They even brought in cardboard cows. Wakeman was completely alienated by the indulgence of it all. He felt disconnected from the music and from his bandmates, leading to his abrupt resignation shortly after the tour concluded. It stands today as the definitive symbol of progressive rock excess. A record that didn't just push the boundaries of its genre, but pushed that genre to the brink of internal collapse. Sometimes, reaching for the heavens just leaves you standing alone in a cardboard pasture. Number 9, A Passion Play by Jethro Tull.
There was a rush.
Imagine holding the #1 album in America. Millions of copies sold, arenas packed with eager fans. And in response, your manager calls a press conference to announce your immediate retirement from live music. That is exactly what happened to Jethro Tull. Frontman Ian Anderson had poured his soul into a dense, continuous 45-minute exploration of the afterlife. Creating it was a technical nightmare from day one. Splicing together endless reels of analog tape to create a seamless suite caused massive audio degradation, but they finished it. The fans bought it. The critics, however, were merciless. They ruthlessly mocked its theatricality and complex narrative. The backlash was so venomous and felt so deeply personal that the band retreated from the public eye in utter devastation. They canceled all their future plans. Here's what most people don't realize. Overwhelming commercial dominance couldn't shield them from the sting of rejection. It proves that no matter how many records you sell, the armor of an artist is always dangerously thin. Number 8, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis. There is a special kind of agony in having to pretend everything is fine when your world is falling apart. For Genesis, that pretending lasted an entire world tour. Before they even stepped on stage to promote their sprawling new concept album, frontman Peter Gabriel secretly announced his resignation to the rest of the band. He had insisted on solely writing and controlling the bizarre narrative, a surreal story following a Puerto Rican youth navigating New York City. The rest of the band composed and recorded the music entirely in a separate room. It was an unbridgeable communication breakdown. Night after night, they played the new material. The live shows were highly ambitious, utilizing one of the very first complex, synchronized multi-screen slide projection systems in rock history. Yet, beneath the visual spectacle, the men on stage were drifting further apart with every passing chord. The tension was palpable. Gabriel eventually walked away, closing the book on their theatrical era forever. And that's where everything changes. This fractured, demanding project inadvertently paved the way for the globally dominant, radio-friendly Phil Collins era of Genesis. Sometimes the painful end of a grand vision is simply the necessary birth of another. But while some acts managed to survive the collapse of their own grand designs, others were entirely consumed by them. Number 7, Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. There are songs that fit the mold, and then there are songs that break the mold over their knee. This particular track shattered literally every rule of commercial radio formatting, yet it somehow became the most requested piece of music of the entire year. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant built the massive arrangement primarily at Headley Grange. They anchored the whole composition around a relentless circular Arabic tuning that completely confused standard pop musicians. Radio executives absolutely hated it. The daunting runtime of 8 minutes and 28 seconds completely destroyed their meticulously planned commercial break schedules. But underground FM disc jockeys did not care about ad schedules. They started playing it illegally, and the overwhelming listener response eventually forced the mainstream stations to capitulate. Even the professional session musicians brought in from London were completely baffled during the recording process. The string and horn players struggled to keep up with John Bonham's complex, polyrhythmic drumming as he played in common time, while the main riff operated in a completely different time signature. It was difficult, dense, and demanding. Yet it anchored an album that shot straight to number 1 on the Billboard 200. It proved that audiences were not just passive consumers looking for a quick 3-minute distraction. They craved challenging, expansive journeys. When you refuse to compromise your vision, the world eventually has to tune its ear to your frequency. Number 6, Bat Out of Hell by Meat Loaf. It was 1977, and disco was methodically taking over the American radio dial, releasing an operatic rock concept album about teenage lust and tragedy made absolutely no commercial sense. Yet, against all odds, the record inexplicably exploded in popularity. The mammoth worldwide tour that followed didn't just cement the singer's stardom. It physically destroyed his vocal cords and fractured his mind. Every night, Meat Loaf delivered performances so intensely physical that he required an oxygen tank on the side of the stage. Producer Todd Rundgren had meticulously mixed the album's sweeping motorcycle guitar solos to mimic a roaring engine crossing the stereo field. Taking that massive, highly produced sound on the road proved to be a punishing grind. The relentless touring schedule ultimately caused Meat Loaf to suffer a severe psychological breakdown. The aftermath was devastating. He spent the next decade entangled in vicious, draining lawsuits with his longtime friend and composer, Jim Steinman. We still listen to those soaring choruses today, but what we are actually hearing is one of the best-selling albums in human history, purchased at the direct cost of its creator's physical and mental health. Number 5, Breakfast in America by Supertramp. There is a quiet tragedy in getting exactly what you asked for, and it worked too well. When Supertramp released their 1979 masterpiece, the massive record-breaking pop success permanently severed the lifelong songwriting bond between its two creators. Roger Hodgson and Rick Davies had completely opposing visions for the band's conceptual direction. The overwhelming commercial dominance of this specific record forced them into a shiny pop star mold that Davies deeply despised. The packaging was brilliant, featuring a striking cover image of a diner waitress posing as the Statue of Liberty, holding a glass of orange juice as the torch to frame a New York skyline made entirely of kitchenware. It was clever, it was catchy, and it sold millions of copies. But behind the scenes, the internal tension was becoming absolutely crippling. Hodgson eventually walked away from the band he helped build. It perfectly exemplifies a painful truth about the music industry. Reaching the absolute pinnacle of radio success can fatally alienate a band from its own progressive roots, turning a triumph into an exit sign. Number 4, Quadrophenia by The Who. Think about that for a second. You write a brilliant narrative about the angst of teenage rebellion, only to have the technology betray you in front of thousands of screaming fans. The live shows for this 1973 concept album were such a catastrophic technical disaster that Pete Townshend suffered an on-stage meltdown, physically destroying the backing tape soundboard with his guitar. Townshend had isolated himself to meticulously build sweeping, cinematic, orchestral textures entirely by himself. He used revolutionary ARP synthesizers to create a sonic landscape that was far too complex for 4 men to play live. To pull off the tour, they had to rely on pre-recorded backing tapes. When those tapes continually failed, throwing the band off time and ruining the shows, the men turned on each other. The rest of the band deeply resented Townshend's autocratic control over the ambitious project. The fighting grew bitter. The stress was unbearable. It is a brilliant piece of art that perfectly captured the definitive teenage experience. But it very nearly destroyed the adult men who created it. That kind of technical frustration is one thing. But what happens when the poison comes directly from the music itself? Number 3. Hotel California by Eagles. You can find it here. The concept behind their 1976 album focused entirely on the dark underbelly of the American dream. And that fictional darkness quickly manifested into a very real, incredibly toxic backstage reality. The immense pressure to follow up such a flawless concept record led to paralyzing writer's block. With that pressure came rampant substance abuse. The breaking point was brutal and public. Bassist Randy Meisner famously quit the band following a violent, physical altercation with Glenn Frey backstage. They were literally fighting over the immense stress of hitting a specific high-note night after night on tour. In the studio, the pursuit of greatness was utterly exhausting. The famous dual guitar harmony at the end of the title track took days of precision punching in on analog tape just to achieve absolute perfection. It flawlessly diagnosed the rot of 1970s rock excess. But in doing so, it ironically infected its own creators with the exact same disease. You cannot stare into the abyss without a little bit of it coming home with you. Number 2, The Wall by Pink Floyd. Some bands fall apart in the chaos. Others are dismantled by cold, calculated design. In 1979, Roger Waters literally built a wall between Pink Floyd and their audience. But more importantly, he built a figurative one that got a founding member fired. Waters assumed total dictatorial control over what was a deeply autobiographical concept album. The studio atmosphere was incredibly tense. He ruthlessly forced out keyboardist Richard Wright during production, and then, in a move of profound coldness, hired Wright back only as a salaried session musician for the live theatrical shows. Co-producer Bob Ezrin used an innovative tape looping technique to create the hypnotic, driving disco-style beat that anchored the project's biggest radio hit. It was a massive commercial triumph, but it came at a final cost. It stands as the absolute pinnacle of conceptual rock theater. Yet it formally and permanently ended Pink Floyd as a democratic brotherhood. The wall went up, and the band as they knew it never came back down. Number 1, Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. But there is one record that stands above all others. A record where the concept wasn't fiction. It was simply their lives collapsing in real time. Imagine being legally bound by contracts to write, record, and perform in the exact same room with the people you are actively divorcing. While tracking this unintentional concept album about betrayal, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks were engaged in vicious screaming matches between vocal takes. Across the room, Christine and John McVie refused to speak a single word to each other outside of recording their parts. They communicated their deep grievances entirely through the lyrics they were tracking. The perfectionism was relentless. The drum tracks had to be physically re-recorded very late in the sessions. The master analog tape was literally wearing down to the point of transparency from thousands upon thousands of playback passes. They were scrubbing the tape away, just as they were scrubbing away their relationships. The album transformed the raw, bleeding agony of real-life heartbreak into absolute pop perfection. The very songs they used to weaponize their hatred for one another became the defining soundtrack of an entire generation. people bought it by the millions, completely enraptured by the gorgeous melodies, completely unaware of the blood on the tracks. It is a testament to the strange alchemy of music. Sometimes the worst pain a human being can endure produces the most beautiful art the world has ever heard. Looking back at these monumental achievements, it becomes hauntingly clear that greatness exacts a heavy toll. These artists sacrificed their friendships, their sanity, and their bands simply to press their musical visions onto vinyl. We reap the rewards of their suffering every single time we drop the needle. They gave us immortal music, even if it meant destroying themselves in the process. Because some songs become hits, but others define an entire moment